to Robert, all imparting the perspective of the slave or former slave. In the case of Master Robert, we get the opportunity to see life on a plantation through the eyes and ears of slave twins Amos and Amelia. The kids, Amos and Amelia, and they pick up their friend Tom, leave the slave plantation, and they're going down to the marsh to collect oysters, which is very, very common. And in fact, on the island, the Timacuan Indians, who we know were there at least 2000 BC, for years until the Spanish came and they died of disease, created a midden, which is an S-shaped midden on the entire island from oyster shells. And those oyster shells eventually were used to make cabbage. But in any event, the kids are down getting oysters, and they have no knowledge at all of a hurricane. And so here we are. When the basket is full to the rim, the three trudge back across the marsh. They're excited about the amount of oysters they have harvested. The heat is sweltering. Beads of sweat gently roll off their foreheads, and droplets of perspiration run down their arms. Rivulets of mud made their arms and legs sticky. Suddenly they hear a wave crash on the beach, and then another. When they pulled oysters in the stream bed, they could not hear the ocean. For a moment, they froze. Crashing waves, but the air is still. There's no wind. Tom helps Amos carry the full basket. Something doesn't feel right, he says. Amos, usually skeptical when Tom seems out of sorts, also had the same ominous feeling. Let's run to the top of the dunes and see what's going on, he says. Dropping the basket of oysters, they race across the marsh and climb to the top of the nearest sand dune. The sand scorches their feet. Boy, this is hot, bloods Tom. Two things catch their attention as they scan the ocean. Long, undulating waves crash on the beach, and a strange, hazy copper glow appears on the horizon. Those waves are strange, Tom yells. Look, no whitecaps. There's no wind pushing them. And the sky is a strange color too, Amelia observes. Amelia, let's get these oysters home as soon as possible. Something is strange going on. Amelia, Amos, and Tom survive tropical storms, drenching rains, and thunderstorms that crackle when the lightning strikes and gusty squalls associated with rapidly moving frontal systems. They, like all the residents on Cumberland Island, adapted to the rhythms of the weather, but they've never experienced a hurricane. This is about to change. And I wanted to tie together the movement of hurricanes from the west coast of Africa, along with the movement of slaves from the same area, west coast of Africa. So I try to do it in this next section here. Far to the east, out on the African continent, hurricanes breed. A prolonged drought in the western Sahel may well account for hurricanes on the east coast of the United States. Rising heat from 113 degrees temperature soar in large thermals to altitudes in excess of 4 miles. Particles of dust and sand blown into the atmosphere from a fierce, hot easterly wind blowing out over the cool and moist bulge of Africa set in motion eddies of air that will soon become small cyclones. A single molecule that rises into the atmosphere may well be the origin of storms. The gases associated with decaying vegetation, animal dung, and human fires gently drift and finally pushed by ascending air mixed into a devil's cauldron. A brew so toxic that the largest of ships and the tallest of buildings will be splintered to shreds. In West Africa, long lines of slaves sold by African chieftains to white slavers marched to the waiting ships. The dry wind blows the dust they and their animals kick up high into the air. Great clouds of dust follow these caravans of slaves to their unknown destiny. The ships that will house them in, held packed together and chained to decks, will carry them along the same ocean currents that serve as conduits for the deadly hurricanes. Like leaves carried along a stream, both slave ships and hurricanes will reach the ports of the eastern United States. So we have a hurricane, and there's a lot of activity and action with that, and they survive. Now, Robert Stafford, or Master Robert, met a slave woman who eventually becomes his common-law wife, and she is of French ancestry, and she lives up on the next plantation, and her name is Zabette. And this is a true person, and this is my sense of fiction as to how she got to the main house and eventually became part of his family. The air is heavy, a heaviness that portends death. A shimmer of haze gently sets on the flat water, obscuring the tall reeds and sea ducks that feed among them. Dots of large pink and white hibiscus flowers from marshmallow plants stand mute in the windless early morning. Marguerite Bernardi steps off the veranda of Plum Orchard, one of 13 plantations on Cumberland Island, Georgia. Plantations that prospered before the Civil War. She gently walks through an alley of live oak which frame a cotton field to the landing. The rising sun will be at its zenith this 21st day of June. This is a perfect time to read this, I think. Though now it is not yet, the 21st day of June, the summer solstice, and bliss to the island in the afternoon. Though now it has not yet evaporated the morning mist, apparitions dance like medieval performers at Carnival in the reeds. The island slaves see haints and ghosts in the interplay of light and moisture created by swamp and marsh miasma. Death follows these supernatural occurrences. Aptly named the Low Country, Cumberland Island is the southernmost island of the East Coast. It is an area of swamps, estuaries, sloughs, sand dunes, beaches, and lush maritime forests. The island supported human habitation for thousands of years. Isolated from the mainland, it developed its own culture and practices, and these were different from those on the mainland. Men and the creatures of the time in which they lived take their color from the conditions that surround them, as a chameleon does from the grass or leaves in which it hides. So I wanted to create a sense of place, and it is truly called the Low Country. Marguerite enjoys this time of day. It is not only cool, but the few moments of solitary engagement affords her time to think. Today, her thoughts center on Planter's house, the adjoining plantation not far to the south. She knows the owner very well, Mr. Robert, a man of considerable intelligence and energy. For several decades, she has observed him acquire property, grow cotton, and become prosperous. But now his life is troubled. A brace of brown pelicans interrupts her thoughts as they skim over the low water. She follows a well-worn path to the main house, enters the dining room, and fills a vase with wildflowers she has picked along the way. A mulatto slave, about 19, sets a silver platter on a cherry sideboard. "Miss Bernardi, your tea." "Oh, what beautiful flowers," she softly spoke. "Zabette, pack some clothes. I'm sending you down to Planter's house. Mr. Robert's mother and sister are ill and will need your care," she orders. And so she basically is sent to Planter's house. Within 3 months, both Mr. Robert, he's Mr. Robert, or Master Robert if you're a slave, will die, and he is without anyone to manage the plantation. And so she becomes his, common law wife. What is interesting about her, she can read and write, which is clearly illegal in the South at that time. She also speaks French, and she was also trained to be a nurse. So she really is quite a capable person, and he recognizes those skills and decides to keep her, basically to run his house. During this time period, several things happened on the island. From a historical point of view, he lost a cotton shed and about 4,000 bales of cotton. Now, what is interesting is nobody seems to know how this happened. There's speculation that perhaps the Union forces, who at this point had the blockade, the naval blockade set up, realized he had cotton and was afraid he may try to ship it to the Bahamas to sell for the Confederacy. They may have burned it. The Confederate soldiers may have realized that he had this wealth and he would send it up north. They may have burned it. We don't know who burned it, but what I decided to do was to create a situation where we could talk about the shed. It involved Mr. Robert and, in this case, the two boys, Tom and Amos. Mr. Robert had worked out, and this is historically accurate, had worked out a relationship with the commander of the naval blockade. He supplied the meat and vegetables. Another way that he made money, he could really take lemons and make them into lemonade. I mean, he seized every possible opportunity. And the commander gave him a brand new rifle. And Mr. Roberts said that he would never use it because he didn't see a reason to on the island. Well, it turns out that I have a scene where the boys are coming back from fishing late in the evening. I just want to read just a couple of things here. Boys had been fishing. They took their fish. They also killed a rattlesnake, and it's the typical middle school stuff. And they had the rattlesnake on the shoulder, and they grabbed the fish. And both boys grabbed their few fish they had caught, their poles and the snake, and struck out toward the trail. The golden light of the sunset illuminated the rippled waters of the Sound one last moment before the shades of night is drawn. Darkness rushes in. The moon rises and casts reflected light across the Sound. Amos grabbed Tom's arm. "What's that noise? Can you hear it?" "No," Tom says. "It's coming from the water," Amos says. They are on a bluff overlooking the salt marsh and the Sound. Amos and Tom crouched behind a large gum tree and hid in the shadows. Now they both heard it. Oars splashed not too far away. Someone rows a boat toward them. Amos quietly says, "They're not good oarsmen, too much splashing." "Who will be rowing a boat here this time of night?" Tom ventured. "Anybody we know? Do you suppose they're Yankees?" "I doubt it, Tom. Let's get back and tell Mr. Robert." So they sprint down and they get down to the main house and alert Mr. Robert. And this chapter deals with Mr. Robert telling Amos he'd have to take the small boat and go let the commander know that there's something's about to happen. And they send 8 Yankee soldiers, and they end up, and they get to the shed too late. The shed's on fire. The cattle's running wild. There's now a brush fire started because of the fire. But there's just a lot of chaos and confusion. And in the process, the boys get split up, and they get into the woods, not by their own volition, but to escape the flames. And one of them is grabbed by a regulator. That's Tom, and he's held as hostage. And they take him back to their boat, and Mr. Robert is furious, not only because his shed is burned, but he also stole his piece of property. And I say that very clearly. Tom, now he's going to get his property back. And because of his skills on the island, and he knows the island, he's got this rifle, he eventually makes contact with these people, and Tom is saved. I had a very uncomfortable experience on the island one hot August afternoon. We were on a field trip, and the teachers were given color swatches from a paint store, Moore's, Benjamin, right? And their job was to match these colors to anything in the woods. And some were fluorescent, gorgeous colors. And so we were out in the woods, and I could smell something. I mean, I know what it was a dead horse. We lose a lot of horses on the island annually because they're not cared for, and they literally would drop dead and die. And this particular hot afternoon, you could smell the stench, but what we did not realize soon enough was there were about 12 turkey vultures. And they were eating away. And when turkey vultures get upset, they will regurgitate on you. And that happened to us. And so I included that as part of a scene here. And what's happening here is the kids are leaving the beach. They're taking a shortcut through the maritime forest, and they trip on this template. They didn't know what it was, but they knew that Old Jake did. You know, Old Jake is the storyteller, the archetypal storyteller. And whenever they have a question, they go to his cabin, and he's this old man, and he explains to them what's going on. So they were on their way to tell them about it. They found this template. They had no idea what it was. What it eventually is, it was used to cut live oak, and live oak on Cumberland was used to build the USS Constitution. And so I incorporate that into the story. But this is what happens to them as they're cutting through. During the next few minutes, the threesome uncovers the template and realizes it is much too heavy to drag to Old Jake's quarters. And not only that, but Tom and Amelia started to worry about the haints and witches who might now be hiding in the branches waiting to snag them by their necks. These kids are just petrified of these haints. Let's get back home quick. Caught by their excitement, they let their defenses down. As young children, they were taught to be cautious in the forest. One might come across a rattlesnake basking in the sun, an alligator up a big pond, or the most dangerous, a feral wild boar. His sharp tusks are made to tear its victims. Intent on getting back to Old Jake, not one of them looked up. Overhead, a large flock of grizzly turkey vultures soared. They ride the thermals in constant search of food. Turkey vultures have a keen sense of smell to locate a fresh carcass. Large birds with broad wings and ragged feathers, they are a sinister sight in flight. "Oh my, what is that smell?" Amelia shrieks. "It's putrid," Tom exclaims. The stench almost suffocated them. Never had a smell cause them to choke. Tears rolled in their eyes. "What is it?" Through the glade, they see the vultures huddled like homeless men around a fire. 9 or 10 are fighting over the carcass of a deer. Their ugly red heads and sharply hooked beaks tear through the muscle tissue from the deer. Long strings of red meat is being stretched and fought over. Like madmen in a demonic dance, they hop and flap their wings. In a frenzy, they gobble the remains. The heat and humidity decomposes the deer rapidly. The vultures will soon strip all the meat from the bones and leave only skeletal remains. They ran too close to the vultures. Immediately, all the vultures took flight in savage fury. A black horde circles over Amos, Amelia, and Tom, and in an instant, the first vulture regurgitates his portion of the deer onto Tom. "They're spitting up on me," he yells. Amos looks up and sees at least 13 vultures angrily spewing remains at them. Gobs of vomit splat on their heads and cover their hair. First the stench, and now the bombardment of partially digested, foul-smelling entrails is more than they can bear. "Let's get out of here," they cry. And that's true. It happens, right? In fact, a lot of the scenes that I used to create this novel actually happened to me. Heavy downpour, the creek got flooded, and I was walking my way back to where we stayed, and these shards were sticking out of the sandbank, and you just pull them out like this. And they were all pieces of Temecula pottery that were at least 2,000 years old. And all you had to just look, and there they were. So I used those types of scenes to have kids have some of these adventures. Is that time? Okay, good. Thank you all. I just want to say one thing. At the very end of the story, Robert E. Lee comes to visit Cumberland. His father, Lighthorse Harry Lee, was buried there on the island. And I have Master Robert meet Robert E. Lee. The two Roberts meet at the very end of the book, and that sort of ends the novel. Okay. Thank you all.